Hi, I'm Daniel, 32, and last month my life blew up when I found out my favorite high school teacher, the one I defended for years, was just arrested for knowingly endangering us during a real school shooting. I didn't believe it at first. Not Miss Brown. Not the woman who once gave me a ride home when my mom forgot to pick me up. But then I saw the footage, grainy, security cam footage of her walking through the hallway while everyone else was barricading doors. Like it was a Tuesday and not an active shooter situation. It got worse. Apparently, she refused to follow the lockdown orders. Told kids to sit down or get expelled. Blocked the light switch. Wouldn't even let them hide. I read the transcript like 5 times before it sank in. I sat there in my apartment staring at my phone while this cold, electric shock moved through my chest like, what the hell did we live through? Because I was in her class once. I trusted her. And now I'm wondering what I missed back then. What we all did. So yeah, this is my story. Not about the shooting itself, I wasn't there that day. But about what happens when the person you once trusted turns out to be the villain. This is where it starts. It began when I got a message from a girl named Brianna. I didn't recognize the name, but I opened it anyway. I'm a high school English teacher now, so I get weird messages from students, ex-students, and random parents pretty often. Hey, you probably don't remember me, but I think you had Miss Brown too. She's in the news. Can I ask you something? I blinked at the screen. Miss Brown? Patricia Brown? The Miss Brown? I cracked a little smile. Of course I remembered her. She was terrifying in the way some people find impressive. Always dressed like she was going to a funeral, even on pep rally days. Never smiled. Once made a kid cry over a misplaced comma. But also, weirdly respected. I replied with a thumbs up and said, Sure, what's going on? Brianna sent a link. It was a news article. Local teacher arrested for endangering students during school shooting. And there she was. Miss Brown. Hair perfectly pinned, wearing a navy blazer like she was still at the front of the classroom. Only now, she was in handcuffs. My brain stalled. I clicked the video under the article. Watched her walk calmly out of her apartment, past reporters, saying something about professional judgment. Then it cut to footage inside the school. Lights on. Students visible at their desks. A girl's voice, shaking, describing how Miss Brown refused to let them hide. No, I said out loud, to no one. No way. But then I saw the hallway security video. Time-stamped. Teachers dragging kids into classrooms. Lights flicking off. And Miss Brown, just strolling past the chaos. Calm. Unbothered. I felt sick. I started typing back to Brianna, fingers shaking a little. What happened? What did she do? What she sent next changed everything I thought I knew about Miss Brown. Brianna didn't send a short answer. She sent a Google document 47 pages long. Titled, Room 203, What Really Happened? I didn't breathe for the first 3. Not after the part where Miss Brown stood in front of the light switch with her arms crossed, refusing to turn it off. Not after she told a room full of terrified kids, sit down or you're expelled. And definitely not after the part where the shooter walked past their classroom door, shadow visible under the crack, and Miss Brown didn't even flinch. My stomach dropped lower with every page. This girl, Brianna, she wasn't being dramatic. She was documenting everything. Word for word. She had transcripts of texts she sent during the lockdown. Descriptions of classmates sobbing behind barricaded desks. Audio. Video. She wasn't just telling a story. She was building a case. And the worst part? I recognized the tone. Miss Brown's exact brand of condescending, steel-spined authority. The way she wielded control like a weapon, and somehow convinced everyone it was for their own good. Reading it, I could hear her voice again. The voice that once told me I wasn't college material, because I used contractions in a formal essay. The voice that punished me for asking to go to the bathroom during a pop quiz. Back then I'd laughed it off, said she was just tough. Now it sounded a lot like something darker. I was halfway through the doc when I stopped cold. There was a name I hadn't heard in years, Jake Wilson. A kid 2 years younger than me. Skinny, quiet, always drawing in the margins of his notebook. I remembered him because once, when I was a senior, he got up during class to ask Miss Brown something and she humiliated him in front of everyone. Said he'd never amount to anything if he kept mumbling like a frightened mouse. He didn't come back for a week. In Brianna's doc, Jake was the shooter. And here's the part that chilled me. He had filed a formal complaint against Miss Brown 3 years ago. It was sealed, buried, quietly ignored. And she knew. She knew he had a fixation on her. That he'd spiraled. And she still chose to keep her students exposed. Why? That's what I couldn't stop asking. What kind of person hears gunshots and refuses to hide? I scrolled back up and sent Brianna a message. I need to help. Whatever you're doing, whatever this is, I'm in. She replied in seconds. Good. We're building something. Survivors of Room 203. You're not the only former student with stories. And that's when I realized. Miss Brown's story didn't start with the shooting. It started years ago. With all of us. The group chat exploded 2 nights later. Not with texts, but evidence. Daniel, a former classmate of mine who used to hide behind his mop of hair and never say much, sent a message that nearly broke the thread, a video file. It was shaky, phone footage from the main office security monitor that he'd secretly recorded while sheltering during the shooting. It showed Miss Brown walking down the hallway. Not running. Not hiding. Walking. While other classrooms were barricading. While kids were screaming. While shots echoed just seconds away. And then, just when I thought I couldn't feel any sicker, the audio caught her checking her phone. No flinch. No panic. Just calmly scrolling, as if she were waiting for the lunch bell. Rebecca, the lawyer representing the 23 families, dropped the video into the main Slack channel and typed. This isn't just negligence. It's willful endangerment. Suddenly, we weren't just a support group. We were a legal movement. Brianna called me that same night. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying or yelling, or both. She knew Daniel, she said. She knew it was Jake in that hallway. That's why she didn't hide. She didn't think he'd hurt her. She thought he'd go after someone else. She paused, like she couldn't say the next part. She used them. Used us. As proof of her control. As props to show she could maintain order while everyone else panicked. I couldn't speak. Because somewhere deep in my gut I believed her. I remembered my own moments in Room 203 years earlier, when she made me redo an entire project because I used a blue pen instead of black. When she called me undisciplined in front of the class because I forgot to underline a title. Back then I thought she was just strict. Now I realized it was a pattern. Control for control's sake. The next day, news broke. Jake's manifesto had leaked. 3 entire pages about Miss Brown. About how she mocked him. Failed him. Destroyed his college dreams over a single formatting error. How he'd filed a complaint and been told, "This isn't serious." And in chilling detail, he wrote how he'd decided, if the world wasn't going to listen, he'd make them watch. It was the first time I'd ever cried in my adult life for someone I barely knew. Not because I sympathized with Jake, but because I saw how adults failed him. Failed all of us. Because if someone had taken his complaint seriously years ago, just one person, we might not even be having this conversation. Miss Brown wasn't just one bad teacher. She was a system. And we were about to burn it down. By the end of that week, the survivors of Room 203 had gone viral. It started small. Brianna's TikTok, reading the timeline out loud with audio of the gunshots layered in the background, hit 2 million views overnight. Then Ben posted his own story. How he almost stayed in his seat. How the only reason he lived was because someone else broke the rules. Within days, teachers across the country started stitching their own videos. Here's how I hid 32 kids in 18 seconds. This is our lockdown procedure, the one I actually followed. The tag #BrownChoseControl exploded. News anchors picked it up. By Monday morning, the Today Show was running a segment titled, "When Teachers Failed the Test." But the twist came at Tuesday's press conference. Rebecca, our lawyer, stood on the courthouse steps holding a yellowed manila folder. And with cameras flashing and reporters shouting, she dropped the bomb. This is a 2009 file from Westfield High. It contains a sealed report of a student suicide attempt, naming Patricia Brown as a contributing factor. That report never made it past the district office. You want to know why? She held up a second folder. Because the superintendent's wife was Ms. Brown's cousin. And just like that, the story cracked wide open. Miss Brown wasn't transferred to our district for being a talented educator. She was relocated quietly after a student tried to take her own life following months of documented verbal abuse. Gaslighting. Public humiliation. The exact same tactics we'd all experienced. My hands were shaking as I watched from my apartment. The narrative was shifting. She wasn't the victim of cancel culture anymore. She was a predator with tenure and connections, and we were just the first ones loud enough to be heard. That night, I dug into old social media posts, Reddit threads, even Wayback Machine archives. Found 3 different posts from years ago where anonymous users named her as their worst teacher. Same stories. Same mind games. Always the same line. But no one ever believed me. The next morning, we started a website. www.survivorsofroom203.org. Within 48 hours, it had 47 testimonials. People from 3 schools, across 2 decades, describing exactly what Brianna had outlined. Public degradation. Grade sabotage. Gaslighting that made students question their memory, their intelligence, their sanity. And in the middle of it all, Miss Brown. Always calm. Always composed. Always in charge. Until now. Miss Brown's arrest made national headlines, but it was her bail hearing that lit the match. She showed up in court wearing a pressed gray suit with all her teaching awards pinned to her lapel like medals. I'm not even joking. One for Educator of the Year. Another for Academic Excellence in History Instruction. She stood behind the defense table like it was a podium and smiled for the cameras. The judge set her bail at $50,000. Her supporters raised it in 2 hours. That was the moment I realized we weren't just up against a broken system, we were up against an entire myth. The tough teacher myth. The one that says cruelty equals high standards. That humiliation builds character. That obedience is virtue and questioning authority is weakness. And people loved Miss Brown for it. Even as video after video came out showing her students frozen in their seats while gunshots echoed in the halls. Even as reports stacked up of sealed complaints. Even as her own former assistant came forward on the local news saying she quit mid-year after witnessing too much psychological abuse. Still, the comments flooded in. She was just doing her job. Kids today are too sensitive. This is why teachers are quitting. Nobody respects them anymore. I wanted to throw my phone out the window. Because respect isn't obedience. Respect is earned by protecting the people in your care, not sacrificing them to prove a point. Then came the surveillance footage. Daniel's grainy hallway video? The FBI ran it through enhancement software and pulled out audio. Clear as day. At timestamp 9:47 a.m., just seconds after the first confirmed gunshot, Miss Brown's voice came through. If this is real, they deserve what they get for not respecting me. The courtroom gasped. Reporters fell silent. Her own lawyer looked like he'd swallowed glass. That clip aired on every major news outlet by nightfall. And if there was any doubt about her intentions before, it vanished in 6 chilling seconds. She didn't just fail to protect her students. She deliberately left them exposed. Because in her mind, obedience mattered more than safety. Ego mattered more than lives. The district attorney announced upgraded charges the next morning. 23 counts of reckless endangerment. 1 count of attempted murder through depraved indifference. The phrase sounded like legalese until you really let it sit. Depraved indifference. That's what she'd shown. Cold, calculated, unflinching disregard for human life. And we were done being quiet. Tyler, Brianna, Ben, and I recorded a joint video that night. Just 4 faces lit by phone screens, telling the world what happened in room 203. I said the words slowly, because I wanted them to land. We were taught to respect authority. But sometimes authority is the most dangerous thing in the room. By morning, the video had 3 million views. And the nation was finally listening. 3 weeks before trial, the school district made their move. They offered a settlement, $30 million split among the families. No admission of wrongdoing. No accountability. Just money and silence. About half the families took it. I don't blame them. Medical bills, therapy, lost jobs, shattered trust, it adds up. But the rest of us? We wanted justice. Not hush money. My parents, Ben's, Brianna's, Tyler's, we all held out. Because if Miss Brown could do this and walk away with her pension, what would stop the next one? Rebecca, our lawyer, called an emergency meeting at the community center. She showed up in jeans and a blazer, holding a binder thicker than a phone book, and said, "We're going federal. Civil rights violations. Systemic negligence. Child endangerment." I looked around the room, 23 of us. Different ages, different families, but the same 1,000-yard stare. The same nightmares. The same scars. One girl from across the room whispered, "We shouldn't have had to save ourselves." Everyone nodded. The media coverage spiraled. News vans parked on our streets. Old classmates dug up stories from years ago. One of Miss Brown's former students posted a college admissions essay she wrote about surviving Miss Brown's class emotionally, before the shooting even happened. Meanwhile, the State Board of Education got dragged into the storm. Under pressure from the public and lawmakers, they finally subpoenaed 10 years of school records. What they found? 17 formal complaints against Miss Brown. All quietly resolved. Some ended in student transfers. Some in counseling recommendations. A few had handwritten notes from principals like, "Not worth pursuing, teacher protected by union." It was a paper trail of fear, neglect, and administrative cowardice. And the parents? They were furious. Not just at Miss Brown, but at everyone who looked the other way. The superintendent who transferred her instead of firing her. The counselor who filed Jake's warning and never got a response. The PTA president who said, "She's strict, but she gets results." The dominoes started falling. Principal Foster resigned. The district safety officer went on leave. 2 school board members were voted out. Then came the kicker. A custodian named Frank showed up at Rebecca's office with an old USB stick. It had footage from a forgotten security camera system the school stopped using in 2020, but never turned off. The video? Jake Wilson. Leaving room 203 with tears in his eyes and blood on his knuckles from punching the wall. The same day he filed his complaint against Miss Brown. You could see the rage on his face. The helplessness. And Miss Brown? She walked out behind him 5 minutes later, calm as ever, adjusting her cardigan. It wasn't just failure anymore. It was patterned, protected abuse. And now, finally, the world was seeing it too. The trial began on a gray Monday morning, the kind where everything feels heavy, like the air knows what's coming. Miss Brown arrived in a sharp suit again, different color, same posture. Chin up, spine straight, like she was accepting an award instead of standing trial for nearly getting us killed. The courtroom was packed. News crews outside. Every bench inside filled with families, press, and a jury that looked like they'd all aged 10 years just from reading the pre-trial evidence. The prosecution's opening statement was short, and it cut like a scalpel. This case is not about whether there was a shooting. It's about what happened in room 203 when the shots were already echoing through the hall, and a teacher refused to let children protect themselves. They played the audio next. It was mine. From the day of the shooting. I'd been recording for a class project. You could hear the announcements, the distant gunshots, the rising panic in the room, and then Miss Brown's voice. "Sit down or you're expelled. I did not authorize a drill. You're all being hysterical." The silence in the courtroom was complete. Even the bailiff looked shaken. When I took the stand, I could barely feel my legs. I looked at the jury and told them everything, how we begged her to let us hide, how she blocked the light switch, how 23 teenagers had to save themselves. I kept my voice steady until the last sentence. She chose her authority over our lives. That one hit. I saw a juror wipe her eyes. Tyler testified next. He'd been in a different building during the shooting, hiding in a chemistry supply closet. When he described getting my texts, knowing I was in Miss Brown's room, his voice cracked. Then broke. He had to pause 3 times just to finish his sentence. She was supposed to protect them. She left them visible. But the moment that changed everything was on day 4. The prosecution had enhanced the hallway footage again. They'd layered the original surveillance audio with sync timestamps. And there it was, Miss Brown's voice, clearer than ever, as she looked at the frightened students and said, "If this is real, they deserve what they get for not respecting me." A juror gasped out loud. Parents sobbed in the gallery. Miss Brown's own lawyer visibly flinched. And yet, she still took the stand. Against her attorney's advice, she got up there and told the jury that she'd done nothing wrong. That order was her priority. That running and hiding would have caused chaos. She said she was a victim of hysteria, of TikTok, of soft children. Then the prosecutor asked, "Did you recognize Jake Wilson's voice in the hallway?" Miss Brown froze. And then she said yes. Gasps. Shouting. The judge pounding the gavel. The court exploded as it hit everyone at once. She knew it was him. The student who filed complaints. The one she pushed to the edge. She knew he might be there for her. And she still kept the lights on. Still kept those kids visible. Because admitting she was wrong meant giving up control. And that was her greatest fear. Verdict day. The courtroom buzzed with attention so thick it felt like breathing through soup. Families lined the benches. Reporters whispered into mics. Rebecca, our lawyer, squeezed my shoulder so hard it left a mark. The jury filed in, eyes straight ahead. The judge asked for their decision. On the charge of reckless endangerment of a minor, guilty. On the charge of depraved indifference, guilty. Every count. All 23. Guilty. Miss Brown didn't faint. She didn't scream. She just sat down slowly like someone unplugged her batteries. Her hands rested in her lap. She blinked once. Twice. That ironclad calm finally cracked, and she looked small. The sentencing hearing came 2 weeks later. The courtroom was quieter this time, except for the sniffles of parents holding framed photos of the 2 students who didn't survive, Michael and Sophia. The judge asked if anyone wanted to speak. I stood. My hands were slick with sweat, the papers shaking in them like a leaf in a storm. But my voice was steady. Miss Brown taught us that obedience mattered more than survival. That her control was worth more than our safety. But on the worst day of our lives, we had to choose between listening to her or staying alive. I chose to live. Others didn't get the chance. I didn't look at her. I didn't have to. She was sitting right there, pale, hollow, no awards on her chest this time. The judge gave her 18 years in prison. Parole after 12. But time didn't feel like enough. What could be? That night, Tyler and I drove to the school. There's a memorial outside now. Photos, candles, a bench with 2 names carved into it. But what caught my eye was a laminated copy of the student handbook. Someone had highlighted the lockdown procedure and taped a note beneath it that read, "These rules save lives. When teachers follow them." We sat there in silence, hands clasped tight, watching as a breeze flicked the edges of the paper like it was still alive. The next morning, I got an email from State University. I'd been accepted to their education policy program. Tyler's already deferred a year to stay close, but we made a promise: we were going to change things. From the inside. For real. My roommate doesn't know my story yet. Sometimes I think about telling her. Other times, I just enjoy the quiet. The feeling of being normal. But I know I'll speak again when it matters. I already did once. In room 203. When I stood up, turned off the lights, and told the world. We will not die at our desks. Thanks for listening. We made it. Together.